Welcome to Headline Wednesday from Dispatch, U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by trackpads.com. Each week, we take one pivotal moment from United States military history and follow it from the first warning signs to the final outcome. Today, we go to Mogadishu, Somalia, in the early post-Cold War era for the story of the Black Hawk Down battle. Late in the afternoon over Mogadishu, the city presses in from every side. Rotor blades chop the air, the sound bouncing off concrete walls and tight alleyways while dust swirls in the streets. Thin antennas on rooftop corners tremble in the downwash of circling helicopters, marking how low the aircraft are flying. The city feels like a pressure cooker. Below, Rangers pour out of armored vehicles and sprint to their blocking positions, boots striking broken pavement as Somali civilians scatter into doorways and side streets to get out of the way. The mission is a raid into the Bakara market stronghold, a place that has sheltered gunmen and warlord lieutenants for months. Rangers lock down intersections while Delta operators move toward the main target building, trying to seal off escape routes before anyone inside understands what is happening. It is supposed to be simple. This is meant to be in fast, grab key lieutenants of a warlord who has been bleeding United Nations convoys and starving neighborhoods by force, and then out again before the city can truly react. Inside a walled compound, Delta operators move with the practiced economy of men who have done this many times before. They clear rooms, stack on doors, and call out short commands over the noise as they push deeper toward the center. The radios crackle with clipped updates as prisoners are searched, cuffed, and brought toward a collection point in the middle of the target building. The pattern feels familiar and under control. Overhead, Black Hawk helicopters orbit in tight patterns, their crews scanning the maze of streets below for armed men, technical trucks with mounted guns, and any unexpected movement that hints at a gathering threat. Beyond the immediate target, the first scattered shots start to echo. At first, it is just sporadic gunfire in the distance, the kind of harsh background noise that has become part of daily life in Mogadishu. Then the volume builds, from isolated cracks into a harsher, more continuous rattle as militias realize what is happening and begin to converge on the raid. The sound over the city changes. Fighters move toward the dust cloud and the noise, following the arcs of the circling aircraft to the heart of the American operation. Soon, the helicopters themselves are under direct fire. What had been random gunshots now includes a rising storm of small arms and rocket-propelled grenades streaking upward from alleys and rooftops. One Black Hawk takes a hit and begins to limp away from the target area, trailing smoke as the crew fights to keep control of the wounded aircraft. The mission begins with food and fear. Moments later, another helicopter is struck, and this time there is no recovery as it spirals down into the very neighborhood the Americans are trying to dominate. When that helicopter hits the streets, the entire logic of the raid shifts. What was supposed to be a short, contained operation now has a burning wreck in the middle of a hostile city. The soldiers on the ground know at once that they are no longer just assaulting a compound and escorting prisoners back to base. The danger does not stay at the roadside. They are fighting to reach friends who have just fallen from the sky, and every shot they hear near the crash site tightens that urgency. To understand what is at stake around those crash sites, it helps to pull back from the dust and broken glass. The battle over Mogadishu in 1993 grows out of a United Nations effort to bring food and some kind of stability to a country torn apart by clan warfare and the collapse of central government. United States forces first arrive as a humanitarian shield, using visible patrols and heavy vehicles to keep aid convoys moving. Their job is to stop gunmen from hijacking trucks and looting supplies meant for starving civilians along the roads and in the camps. The mission begins as a straightforward answer to hunger and chaos. Over time, that mission slowly changes shape. Guarding relief trucks turns into confronting the warlords who control neighborhoods with roadblocks, mortars, and fear. One of the most powerful faction leaders has already shown that he is willing to kill peacekeepers in large numbers to keep his grip on the city. His gunmen profit from disorder and treat international forces as just another rival gang to be outlasted or driven out. The lines between relief work and combat begin to blur. The city becomes a place where every convoy and patrol carries both food and political meaning. The raid into Bakara market is designed to break that warlord's power without a full-scale battle for the entire city. It aims to snatch key lieutenants and send a message that even strongholds are not safe from precise, fast-moving special operations forces. The plan assumes speed and surprise from the first second. On paper, helicopters and rangers will drop in. Delta operators will secure the main objective. Prisoners will be loaded, and everyone will be back at base before local militias can organize a serious response. On paper, it all looks achievable. Once a helicopter goes down inside Mogadishu, the geometry of risk changes instantly. A downed crew cannot be abandoned without tearing at the core of the Ranger and Special Operations ethos, which holds that no one is left behind. Every minute that passes gives armed fighters more time to set ambushes, block streets with makeshift barricades, and turn rooftops into firing platforms overlooking likely rescue routes. The stakes rise with every passing minute. What hangs in the balance now is not just the success of a single raid or the capture of a handful of lieutenants, but the lives of pilots, crew chiefs, door gunners, rangers, and Delta operators scattered, cut off, and surrounded in a hostile city as armored convoys grind toward the crash sites and small groups of Americans dig in around burning wreckage, testing how far a nation will go to recover its own under fire. The fight around the crash sites does not begin in a vacuum. It is the hard edge of a long, twisting story that starts on a very different kind of landing. In late 1992, when United States Marines first came ashore along the Somali coast, television cameras capture images of starving civilians lining the roads. The early mission is sharply defined and visible. Secure ports, escort food convoys, and shove bandits and militias back far enough that aid can flow. Heavy armor at intersections and helicopters overhead make it dangerous to hijack relief trucks, and famine deaths begin to fall. What does not change is the deeper question of who truly rules Mogadishu, and the warlords who have profited from disorder have no intention of fading away. As the United Nations mission evolves from pure relief to something closer to peace enforcement, some faction leaders decide to challenge it directly. When peacekeepers are ambushed and killed in large numbers, the violence sends shockwaves far beyond the city. In Washington, pressure grows to respond with something more precise and punishing than routine patrols and checkpoints. The answer is a small, elite task force built from rangers, Delta operators, aviation crews, and specialized support teams. These are soldiers and operators trained to land hard on a target, seize what they came for, and disappear before the enemy can fully react. In the months leading up to the raid on Bakara market, that task force runs a series of operations in Mogadishu. They hit safe houses, grab lieutenants, and test different insertion and extraction points around the city. Speed and surprise hold, and on most raids they are back at base within an hour, prisoners in tow and casualties light. Each success builds confidence that they can pull off another strike, even in daylight and with relatively light armored support on the ground. Commanders weigh the risk of staying on the sidelines while a hostile warlord grows stronger against the risk of pressing into his heartland, and the decision to launch the mission that will turn into the Black Hawk Down battle grows from that cold calculation. When the helicopters roar in over Bakara market on October 3, 1993, the opening minutes unfold almost exactly as rehearsed on the airfield. Rangers fast rope from hovering aircraft onto their designated corners, forming blocking positions at key intersections. Delta operators drive through gates and across courtyards, hitting the main target building with speed that feels almost routine to veterans of earlier raids. Prisoners are cuffed, searched, and moved toward vehicles waiting to haul them away. Overhead, Black Hawks orbit in tight patterns, and smaller scout helicopters watch the surrounding streets, giving the impression that planning and repetition are paying off. Outside the immediate target area, however, the rest of the city starts to wake up. Armed fighters grab rifles and rocket launchers from hidden caches and begin moving toward the columns of dust and noise. Technical trucks with mounted machine guns weave through side streets, hunting for angles on the ranger blocking positions. Women and children sprint away from the sound of gunfire, while groups of young men converge on it, pulled in by anger, loyalty, or simple momentum. The density of Mogadishu, with its alleys, courtyards, and rooftop vantage points, favors defenders who know every shortcut. It punishes outsiders whose maps and mental pictures are still incomplete. The first helicopter shot down crashes only a few blocks from the main target, and a security element of rangers and operators moves quickly on foot to reach it. They fight from building to building and stairwell to stairwell, pushing through growing fire toward the wreckage. The second Black Hawk falls deeper into the city, in an area that was never meant to see American boots that day. With that second crash, the original plan has to stretch and twist under pressure. Commanders order convoys of Humvee vehicles and trucks to punch through toward both crash sites, turning what was supposed to be a short escort mission into a desperate race through hostile streets. As the sun drops toward the horizon, the streets become long, lethal funnels. Nearly every intersection seems to hide another ambush waiting behind it. Open-topped vehicles are raked by fire from windows and rooftops, and rocket-propelled grenades slam into engines and passenger compartments. Medics work on wounded soldiers in the backs of bouncing trucks, while drivers try to keep moving through smoke, debris, and sudden roadblocks. Radios carry overlapping calls for ammunition, medical evacuation, and directions that are increasingly hard to trust as landmarks blur in the dust and confusion. Some convoys circle the same blocks more than once, bleeding casualties while never quite breaking through to their goals. Gunners fire in short, controlled bursts at muzzle flashes and shadowy figures, trying not to hit civilians who are still in the streets. Inside the vehicles, soldiers try to maintain some sense of where they are, even as routes that seemed clear on maps turn into dead ends or barricaded alleys. The frustration of being lost combines with the constant threat of another attack, stretching nerves and endurance. Each failed attempt to reach the crash sites drives home how quickly a familiar city map can turn meaningless in the chaos of urban combat. Back at the original target building and around the first crash site, small groups of Americans dig in as if on islands in the middle of a hostile sea. They pull wounded comrades behind whatever pieces of concrete or rubble offer even a little protection. Fields of fire are laid out down alleys that were anonymous side streets only hours earlier. Ammunition is redistributed. Likely avenues of approach are watched, and every movement on a rooftop or at a corner is evaluated as a possible threat. The fight becomes personal and close, measured in doorway widths and the distance across a single intersection. Every minute, those small positions hold buys time for higher headquarters to improvise a larger rescue effort that will eventually include armored vehicles from international partners. Plans are sketched, altered, and pushed out over crowded radio nets as leaders try to match limited resources to a problem that is growing by the hour. The knowledge that other forces are fighting their way in provides a thin thread of hope to the men holding the perimeter. For them, the battle has already narrowed to something brutally simple: survive until help can fight its way through, and keep the enemy from overrunning the fallen and the wounded clustered around the shattered helicopters. The positions around the crash sites held because people made stubborn choices under fire. At the first helicopter wreck, Rangers and Delta operators took a tangle of sheet metal, shattered buildings, and narrow streets and turned it into a defensive perimeter. They dragged wounded crewmen and soldiers into cover wherever they could find it, even if that meant pulling them through broken windows or smashed doorways. They knocked holes through interior walls so they could move between rooms without stepping into open streets. That ugly little patch of city became a strong point. Along those makeshift lines, they laid out arcs of fire down alleys that had been anonymous side streets only hours earlier. Each doorway and intersection was assigned, watched, and fought over. Every small choice to hold one more corner forced Somali fighters to pay dearly for every meter they tried to take. Simple acts, like shifting a machine gun a few feet or trading ammunition between foxholes, kept gaps from opening. The fight at that crash site became a test of nerves and endurance more than any written plan. Deeper in the city, where the second Black Hawk fell, 2 Delta snipers made one of the battle's defining choices. They requested permission more than once to be inserted at the crash site, fully aware that help was far away and that their odds of survival were thin. When they finally dropped in, they were stepping into a neighborhood already filling with armed fighters. Their stand did not magically turn the wider fight, but it bought precious minutes and hours. It bound the fate of the aircrew and the ground force together in a way that still echoes in unit histories. Overhead and along the edges of the fight, helicopter pilots kept damaged aircraft in the air longer than anyone had a right to expect. They shifted their fire to suppress gunmen closing in on the isolated positions. They used their searchlights and sensors to pick out threats in the growing darkness, pointing other guns and convoys toward the worst danger. All of that happened as fuel gauges dropped and daylight ran out. Those pilots stretched every second they could get. As night closed in, the final turning factor rolled forward in steel and armor. A relief column formed that brought together United States light infantry and armored vehicles from Malaysian and Pakistani contingents operating under the broader mission. These heavier vehicles could absorb punishment that soft-skinned trucks could not. Their crews had a different kind of experience moving through urban streets under fire. For the men still holding around the crash sites, that rumble of heavier engines meant a chance that the rescue would not die in the alleys. Guiding those armored vehicles toward the surrounded positions took as much courage as holding the perimeter itself. Soldiers who had already survived one ambush-riddled ride climbed back into vehicles to serve as guides and escorts. They pointed out landmarks in the dark, called turns over the radio, and warned drivers about likely choke points. Gunners stood exposed in hatches, scanning rooftops and intersections for rocket teams as the column pushed deeper into the city. Every block gained was another small victory. When the relief column finally broke through, it reached clusters of exhausted men who had been fighting for their lives for hours. Wounded soldiers and crewmen were loaded into the armored vehicles, sometimes stacked on the floor or across laps because space was so tight. Others moved out on foot alongside the column, still scanning doorways and rooftops even as they staggered with fatigue. The long, dangerous withdrawal toward the stadium became its own battle, fought in reverse along streets that still held ambushes. The raid had clearly failed in its original goal, but the day did not end with isolated pockets overrun and abandoned. Instead, it ended with a battered force that refused to break, pulled out under fire by a multinational effort that kept a terrible day from becoming an outright disaster. Tactically, the cost to the United States was severe. Several helicopters lay destroyed, and many Rangers and Delta operators were killed or wounded. The images of American soldiers' bodies dragged through Mogadishu's streets burned themselves into public memory. Somali casualties, both fighters and civilians, were far higher, and the neighborhoods around the crash sites were left scarred by explosions, bullet holes, and grief. At the campaign and political level, the fight in Mogadishu became a pivot point. Within months, United States combat forces withdrew from Somalia. The appetite in Washington for open-ended peace enforcement missions shrank sharply. Officers and policymakers argued over whether the problem had been unclear political goals, restrictive limits on what weapons could be used, or the sheer complexity of fighting in a failed state's capital. Whatever the mix of reasons, Mogadishu turned into a warning word about urban combat, mission creep, and the risks of intervening without a clear path from first landing to final exit. Future decisions about crises in places like Rwanda and Bosnia unfolded under the shadow of that day's images and casualty lists. Inside the services, the battle drove hard lessons into training, doctrine, and equipment. Units revisited how they armored vehicles, how they coordinated air and ground elements in dense cities, and how they planned for worst-case contingencies when a quick raid suddenly stretched into an all-day siege. The story of Rangers and Delta operators holding under extreme pressure became part of how those communities taught courage, small unit leadership, and the duty to recover fallen comrades, no matter the odds. For students of military history and for serving professionals, the fight in Mogadishu stands as more than a dramatic firefight retold on the page or on screen. It is a case study in how a mission defined in narrow tactical terms can carry strategic weight far beyond its original aim. It shows how grit and sacrifice on the ground intersect with national decisions made far away from the sound of gunfire. It reminds listeners that individual choices on a single day in a single city can shape how a country thinks about intervention for years afterward. You have been listening to Headline Wednesday from Dispatch U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by trackpads.com. Each episode follows one pivotal moment in United States military history, from the first warning signs to the final outcome. We hope this look at the Black Hawk Down battle in Mogadishu helps frame both the courage shown in the streets and the wider decisions that grew from it.